Okay, we're going to begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Sedota. I am very happy to talk about the fact that this is workshop 2 of the Responsible Conduct of Research workshop series. It's on authorship and reviewer ethics. We have an excellent presenter. He presented last week as well, Dr. Stephen Fliesler. And I do want to tell you that we do have other workshop series. First of all, there's 4 more in this session after this one. And then there is a scientific communication workshop series that's going on Tuesdays as well. And then also in June, we're going to have our one and done medical bioinformatics session, which leads to Dr. Peter Elkin's excellent boot camp on biomedical informatics as well. I'm going to place in the chat for you a link so that you can actually peruse our website a little more. And I also wanted to say that if you attend all 6 of the series, you'll receive a certificate of completion in responsible conduct of research. If you have to miss one, just email me. I can get you the video, and there's a short protocol. You can still end up getting the certificate if you'd like it. If you would like to do the micro-credential in responsible research, you just need to email me. I will again put my email in the chat in a moment. And that includes you actually getting videos of the sessions. And also very important is there's assignments that go along with those videos based on case studies, which you're also going to see some case studies, not the same ones, at the end of this presentation, which is nice. It gives you a chance to actually do a little talking back and forth with our excellent presenter. And we're about ready to start. So I am going to give the floor to Dr. Fliesler.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending lecture number 2 in this workshop series. I did speak to some aspects of plagiarism in the first lecture, which was an overview of responsible conduct in research. I'm going to go into this in more detail and also have some considerably new information that has been added this year for the first time. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. And let me see if I can advance this. Okay, I have no disclosure. So the outline for today's lecture is as following. First, review the definition of plagiarism in the context of research misconduct. I'll discuss various forms of plagiarism, the scope of the problem, both in this country as well as worldwide. Also, some famous plagiarism cases, UV policies pertinent to plagiarism, consequences of plagiarism, useful tips and tools for detecting, dealing with, and avoiding plagiarism. I'm going to go over what's called the credit cycle, giving credit where credit is due. I'm also going to go into the fundamentals of the ICMJE recommendations on contributorship and parse out the difference between contributorship versus authorship, earned authorship, and acknowledgments. Author responsibilities and assurances that you give to journals when you submit your manuscripts for publication. Talk about duplicate or redundant submission and also publication. Added this year, generative AI and use and misuse. And at the end, we'll have case discussions that will illustrate the points that I've gone over in the lecture. There's a huge amount of literature on these topics, and these are just some of the books that have come out in the last decade or so on plagiarism and authorship ethics. This is a very fundamental and informative and free resource, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors' recommendations for the conduct, reporting, editing, and publication of scholarly work in medical journals. I highly recommend that everybody download a copy of this. It's free online and a great resource to refer back to. So just to review from last time, there is a federally accepted definition of research misconduct. This is under the Office of Research Integrity, or ORI. And it is defined as research misconduct is fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research or in reporting research results. So plagiarism, as a general working definition, is theft or misappropriation of intellectual property and the substantial unattributed textual copying of another's work. And the key word here is unattributed. Does not include authorship or credit disputes. Also, the theft or misappropriation of intellectual property includes the unauthorized use of ideas or unique methods obtained by a privileged communication, such as a grant application or a manuscript or review. Plagiarism is a worldwide problem. It is rampant in China, unfortunately. There was a publication, as shown here, that there was an analysis of peer-reviewed papers in China. And in this particular review, it was found that there was 31% incidence of plagiarism in all papers published in 2008 in this one journal. Also, this has made the popular press, and this is just a year ago. This article in Nature said China conducts first nationwide review of retractions and research misconduct. Universities must declare all retractions and launch investigations into misconduct cases. A Nature analysis revealed that since 2021, there have been more than 17,000 retractions with Chinese co-authors. Plagiarism is not only a problem in biomedical research, it extends into every aspect of human endeavor that involves the printed word, and in no less than in the arena of politics. Here's an article appeared in Nature several years ago where the Romanian prime minister was accused of plagiarism. He was seeking a PhD, and he plagiarized other sources without due credit in his PhD thesis. You may remember during the first term of Mr. Trump that during the inauguration, in the convention speech, rather, of his wife Melania plagiarized heavily from a convention speech that Michelle Obama had given previously. I would just like to point out that what I call the Costanza defense, like saying, oh, I didn't know what was wrong, that will actually not fly at all. Ignorance of the law is no excuse in the eyes of the law. So you best learn what are the rules, the conventions, and policies that are applicable in the publishing world, especially in academic publishing. It turns out that plagiarism and misconduct in research is actually quite widespread. And unfortunately, per this article, and there are others that have covered this same topic, plagiarism is on the upswing, not the downswing. Here's an article that came out a few years ago, and opened this quote: among cancer biology and therapies, 221 rejected article submissions. In 2012, 43 had more than 40% of the content similar to another paper. Half were matters of self-plagiarism, and I talked about this previously, and half involved more traditional plagiarism, that is, theft from other people. While questionable research creates a serious problem for journal editors, and I am such an editor, and I just handled a case today of suspected plagiarism, it can create bigger problems for doctors working in the field and patients who may be receiving faulty treatment as a result. So just to go over this concept, and a lot of people don't seem to be very familiar with this, there is such thing as self-plagiarism. It's due to copyright laws. So you can't copy substantial portions of text from one of your own prior publications and use it in a subsequent publication without placing the text in quotes and citing the original source. Also, you can't use the same figures, illustrations, tables in more than one publication unless you get prior permission from the copyright holder, which more typically is not you, but is the journal, and duly credit the original source accordingly, such as in a review article. Here's another article that appeared in Nature a few years ago. Self-plagiarism cases prompts calls for agencies to tighten rules. And this case was going into analysis of publications that utilized the same images repeatedly by one author in several of their publications. Here's another case in the popular press. Jonah Lehrer, a very bright guy, plagiarized his own prior publication in an article in the New Yorker. Authenticate is one of the computer programs that are widely utilized in professional publishing world. All of the Elsevier journals, over 1,400 of them in life sciences alone, utilize Authenticate as a platform for scrutinizing manuscripts and looking for redundancies in the text of submitted manuscripts, comparing them against all published work that's in their database. So this is just one of several tools that are available. And there's a blog that has arisen out of Authenticate that talks about self-plagiarism and more traditional plagiarism and how to avoid it. So I'm going to go over some egregious cases of plagiarism. This is one that I have personal knowledge of. David Bridges at Baylor College of Medicine several years ago. Here are the particulars. He was sent a manuscript to review from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, work from a competing laboratory at Harvard University. Several weeks later, he declined to review that manuscript on the basis of conflict of interest, as he stated. Meanwhile, he repeated the work that was described in the manuscript that was sent to him verbatim, and then submitted his own manuscript to Science magazine for publication, including word for word the method section of the previous manuscript. During the review process, one of the reviewers brought up that they thought they had seen this text somewhere else, and in fact, one of the other reviewers turned out to be the senior author on the paper that Dr. Bridges had been sent to review by PNAS. So there was a plagiarism or a panel was impaneled by the NIH to review the particulars in the case and the allegations of plagiarism. And they found out that Dr. Bridges was definitely guilty of stealing ideas and concepts and written word from Bernstein et al. He was debarred from federal funding and peer reviewing activities for 10 years. And amazingly, his paper was published, as was the Bernstein and Rando paper, almost simultaneously. And that paper had to be retracted. Here's a case that came up. I found this was somewhat humorous. Here is in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and there was this editorial that came out on scientific misconduct, but also a letter to the editor. Dear plagiarist, dear doctor, I am aware that you recently admitted to wrongly publishing as your own a scientific research paper that I had submitted to the Annals of Internal Medicine. After serving as an external peer reviewer on our manuscript, you published that same manuscript in a different medical journal a few months later. You removed the names of the authors and the research site, replacing them with the names of your co-authors and your institution. And here are the citations that are relevant. So this exemplifies a case where a peer reviewer was sent a privileged communication, in this case a manuscript under consideration of publication, and stole that work for his own benefit. So what is wrong with plagiarism? It's kind of like an intersection between moral principles, and remember I talked about at the beginning of my lecture last week, moral principles and moral reasoning and ethics. And it's an intersection between moral reasoning and legal principles. So if you take without permission and pass something off as your own work, it has an intersection of both moral, ethical wrongdoing as well as legal wrongdoing. This is such a widespread problem that not only is there Authenticate, a very popular and widely used tool, but there are multiple such tools in academia. One of the favorite platforms that's used to scrutinize term papers and master's and PhD theses is called Turnitin. But there are many other such platforms. The fact that there are so many of these platforms highlights the fact that nobody makes an invention or a tool or a product for which there is no market. The fact that there's multiple such plagiarism detection software platforms should give you the idea that this is actually a fairly widespread problem. So what are the consequences? Well, it depends on, as I mentioned, whether in the previous lecture, what is it a one-off or is it a repeated offense, and how much damage was done? For some reason, my screen has disappeared. Okay.
You're fine. Great.
So,
Excellent.
bringing this now to our university in particular, there are policies that are posted on the Academic Integrity website. So the University of Buffalo considers plagiarism a form of academic dishonesty and a serious breach of academic integrity. The penalties for plagiarism can be severe, including grade reduction, course failure, student suspension, even expulsion. University instructors are continuously developing more sophisticated methods of detecting plagiarism, including the use of detection software programs, such as I just described in Authenticate. Examples of academic dishonesty, departmental procedures penalizing students, and university policies related to plagiarism are available on the university's website, and this is provided here. Okay. It's the policy of the University of Buffalo to maintain high ethical standards in research and other scholarly work, to prevent misconduct where possible, and promptly and fairly evaluate and resolve any instance of alleged or apparent misconduct. Importantly, this policy applies to all faculty, students, fellows, and staff at UB who are engaged in any manner of scientific or scholarly inquiry. And at the end of my lecture last week, I talked about the process of adjudicating allegations of research misconduct, and we have those policies in place here. If you do a Google search on the terms avoiding plagiarism, in this particular period, about 2 years ago, I found 25 million hits in less than a second. So as I commented on last week, there are these very simple tips of how to avoid plagiarism. Take clear, accurate notes about where you found specific ideas. Write down the complete citation, the information for each item you use. Use quotation marks when directly stating another person's words, and always credit original authors for their information and their ideas. So here are some authorship ethics rules of thumb. Number one, give credit where credit is due. And if you take credit, you also must be willing to take responsibility. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So there's something called the credit cycle. So let's say you do some research, find some original findings, and you report them. in publication, and you use that as your currency for enabling you to get grant support to then continue research activities and then publish that work, et cetera. And so this is a cycle. There's three ways to give credit where credit is due. One is the author byline, and I'll talk about concerns about the number of authors and also the order of authors. Also in the acknowledgments and in footnotes. And thirdly, the literature cited. The literature, it gives precedent and attribution for the scholarly context of the evolution of concepts and hypotheses that is included in your manuscript. So first of all, authors. There are several kinds: senior author, first author, the submitting author, and others. Depending on the role in a project, the position of the author's name is indicating the relative contributions of each person. So a senior author is not the oldest person. It could be, but is not it doesn't refer to age. It's a person who decides on the list of co-authors and the inclusion of acknowledgement, the person that reviews all data and assumes overall responsibility for the validity of those data, and facilitates communication amongst all of the co-authors, and oversees the logistics of manuscript preparation and submission, and also the responses to reviewers' comments. The first author, sometimes called the principal author, is, as the name indicates, it's the first name that you encounter in the list of co-authors. And that first author must have significant contributions in, one, performing experiments, collecting data, interpreting the results, and at least writing the first draft of the manuscript. Now, the number and order of authorship is probably one of the most contentious aspects of publishing. Everybody wants to be the first author, but only one person can be a first author. There is kind of a relatively new way of getting around that by simply designating more than one person and saying that they contributed equally to the publication that is being submitted. But as a rule, I call it the less is more rule. The fewest number of people who contributed substantively in those three ways that I just listed in the previous slide, the better. But you should include anybody who did contribute and earn authorship. You have to consider the implication of who contributed, how much they contributed, what they contributed, and that will dictate in a large part the order of authorship. Who decides this? Well, this has to be a group discussion amongst all of the co-authors. The senior author probably will have the last word, okay? You have to realize that when you cite research publications, almost always it will come out the first author's name, or it will be referred to as the corresponding author, and everybody else is et al. Okay, so it'll be Smith et al. And there's a difference between authorship versus an acknowledgement, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So what is earned authorship? First, it is the extent of participation in the activity that led to the generation of the manuscript that's being submitted for publication. So there's active participation versus passive. So active being more collecting data, for instance, in a laboratory setting, versus having discussion of ideas, for instance, conception and design of the project, analysis and interpretation of the data that's collected in the course of the study, drafting and revising the manuscript, and a final approval of what is being submitted for publication. And that final step is typically the lab director, the principal investigator, or in academia, the thesis advisor. So what is a significant contribution? That is one that has a major effect on the direction, scope, or depth of the research. It can include conceptualization, design, execution, and/or interpretation of research, development of necessary methodology and/or data analyses, and also impacting clear understanding of project goals. But what does not constitute a significant contribution and therefore does not qualify the person for being a co-author? Simply providing funding for the project is insufficient. Merely being the group leader is insufficient. Providing space or instrumentation of reagents, such as, for instance, your department chair might do this, does not qualify as a co-author. Performing routine technical work, you're paid as a technician. You generally are not included in the list of co-authors. And also performing fee-for-service work. You send out, for instance, a sample for DNA analysis. You don't include the people that did that fee-for-service work as co-authors. Merely editing manuscript does not qualify for authorship. Now, here is something that is all too common. When people generate a unique reagent or maybe a cell line, a transgenic mouse line, those people can sometimes pressure other people to be co-authors on papers where the only thing they supplied was that particular reagent or cell line or mouse line. This has to, especially if this work is these generation of these essential reagents has been performed using federal grant funds, which is part of the public domain. You should give due credit for the source of those essential reagents and materials, but that doesn't qualify somebody for co-authorship. Here are the responsibilities of authorship. One is accountability, taking responsibility as well as credit. Cannot disavow responsibility for errors of content, whether by honest mistake or outright deceit. The bottom line is, unless explicit indication of responsibility or role in a project is given, each author shares responsibility for all of the manuscript's content. You give assurances to journals by a signed statement, either by all of the co-authors or by the communicating author with the full knowledge and consent of all others listed as co-author. You give assurances against copyright violations or property right of any third party. And you give assurances taking responsibility for the entirety of the contents and the conclusions of the manuscript, as well as assurances against financial or any other conflicts of interest. And this is a document that is submitted with the manuscript under consideration. So all of the publishing houses have formal authorship verification paperwork and copyright transfer paperwork. Here for Elsevier, this is across the board, all of their journals. Quote, authors are responsible for ensuring the integrity and quality of their reported research. Prior to publication, all authors are required to attest to this by signing a letter of submission, and no manuscript will be published without this consent. What is honorary or gift authorship? It's assigning authorship to a person who had little or nothing to do with the project or manuscript derived therefrom. The flip side of this is authorship exclusion. This is failure to include a person as co-author when that person has substantively contributed to a study or project. In other words, that they qualify for earned authorship. Excluding someone who qualifies as a co-author from reviewing primary data, drafts of manuscripts that have been utilizing the person's intellectual property for the purpose of preventing them from having knowledge about the intended submission of a manuscript. This is comparable to theft. It robs the individual of due credit. So the bottom line, all persons who are designated as co-author should qualify for authorship, and the order of authorship should be a joint decision of all co-authors. Participation must be sufficient to take public responsibility for the content of the manuscript. And remember, I talked about several famous cases, one of which was the human cloning out of Korea, where there were multiple co-authors. The work was determined to include falsified and fabricated information, and all of the persons listed as co-author were actually under scrutiny and review. Some of them were able to claim that they had no knowledge at all of the work that was falsified and fabricated, and they could demonstrate that. So they didn't receive any kind of significant consequences, although with the initial report of that manuscript with their names listed, they were open to a certain amount of ridicule. Under the ICMJE qualifications, there are three conditions that must be met for earned authorship. One is conception and design, or analysis and interpretation of the data, drafting the article or revising the article critically for important intellectual content, and also the final approval of a draft to be submitted. And all three of these conditions must be met for earned authorship. All persons designated as authors should qualify for authorship, and all those who qualify should be listed. Here is a procedure that has evolved over the last decade or so, so-called explicit disclosure. So in this editorial that appeared in Science magazine, it announced that in order to combat honorary authorship, contributors to science as well as to Nature and PNAS shared in development of these principles would have to describe their contributions to the article prior to acceptance. This is similar to the policies that Rennie Drummond promoted at Journal of American Medical Association, except that in science, the information is kept on file but not routinely published. Furthermore, in order to improve accountability, a senior author from each laboratory or group participating in a collaborative project must now certify that she or he has reviewed the original data and its representation. And you will see this in many journals. When you submit a manuscript, they will ask for, you usually designate the author's names by initials, their initials, and there are explicit roles that must be acknowledged, such as collecting data, analyzing the data, writing the first draft of the manuscript, reviewing the manuscript's content before publication or submission rather, and also revisions to manuscripts that may occur. So if you're not a co-author, but you did contribute something, how is that signified? That's done in the list of acknowledgments. So all contributors who did not meet the criteria for authorship should be listed in an acknowledgement section. Examples of those might be acknowledged, including the person who provided purely technical help, your technician, let's say, a writing assistant, a departmental chair who provided only general support. Editors should ask authors to disclose whether they had writing assistants. There are many professional fee-for-service editing groups, and to identify the entity that paid for this assistance. Financial and material support also should be acknowledged. And then remember I said a third way of acknowledging where you got ideas was the citation of literature, gives her historical precedent for the work, should be sufficient to provide adequate intellectual context for your work, and should not purposely exclude contributions of others. Also, you shouldn't heavily cite just your own prior publications rather than citing somebody else who also contributed substantively to the development of ideas and the intellectual framework of your work. You should be cited in the style and format of the journal to which your manuscript has been submitted for publication. So today I received 15 manuscripts for review for Experimental Eye Research, a journal for which I am the editor-in-chief, and half of them I had to send back because they completely failed to utilize or adhere to our policies for how to cite literature in manuscripts submitted to our journal. So this can be a point of contention. And when you submit manuscripts, be very, very sure that you're adhering to the policies that are described in the Guide for Authors. So here's another a council called the Council of Science Editors, and they publish what they call a white paper promoting integrity in scientific journal publications, and they covered several topics, one of which was deceased authors. So for cases in which co-author dies or is incapacitated during the writing, submission, or peer review process, co-authors should obtain disclosure and copyright documentation from a family member or a legal proxy. Okay, and there's a case that I have personal knowledge of. So here's several publications that list a co-author, Schroepfer G.J. Jr. And you can see the dates of these publications: 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. As it turns out, the problem here is that Dr. Schroepfer died in 1998. So he couldn't possibly have designed the experiments or collected or reviewed data or have written or approved or reviewed the submitted manuscripts that were published as shown here. It turns out Dr. Schroepfer was my PhD thesis advisor many years ago. And I think that the people who submitted these papers thought that they were honoring Dr. Schroepfer, but the journals have very strict policies about earned authorship. And even though the work emanated historically from his laboratory, he could not qualify as a co-author. There is an appropriate way to acknowledge the contributions, in his case, to these manuscripts. It was not done. Duplicate publishing. So duplicate publication of essentially the same data constitutes a violation of copyright law and also the ethics of scientific publishing. Do not submit the same manuscripts to more than one journal simultaneously. So there's duplicate submission. That's where you just submitted the same manuscript to two or more journals at the same time. And it's worse if let's say two or more of those manuscripts were accepted for publication and come out in two different journals or more in final form. So this past week, I handled two cases of duplicate submission. This was discovered through the review process when a reviewer who was sent a manuscript that was submitted to my journal wrote back and said that, hey, I received this exact same manuscript from another journal today, and I asked to see that manuscript and confirm that it was in fact the exact same manuscript submitted to at least two journals. We subsequently found out that that author submitted the same journal manuscript to 5 different journals at the same time. And this created a headache for me as an editor, because now not only am I rejecting this manuscript, and we've already wasted a sub-editor's time as well as reviewer's time, but also had to contact the other journals, my counterpart editor-in-chiefs, to alert them to the fact that this had occurred. Okay, so all journals have this guide for authors. Here's another journal, BBA Biomembranes. Submission of a manuscript implies that the work described has not been published before, except in the form of an abstract or as part of a published lecture or academic thesis, and that is not under consideration for publication elsewhere. That its publication has been approved by all of the authors and tacitly or explicitly by the responsible authorities in the laboratories where the work was carried out. And that if accepted, it will not be published elsewhere in the same form, in either the same or another language, without the consent of the editors and the publisher being the copyright holder, by the way. Reference should be made to the previously published abstracts, etc., in the introductory section. Responsibility for the accuracy of the material in the manuscript, including bibliographic citations, lies entirely with the authors. So, you're almost all certainly familiar with the advent of artificial intelligence, AI. This is a phenomenal new tool that has some wonderful, very positive uses, but also it can be used nefariously. So I have this new section called the Monster in the Room. The advent of remarkable growth and misuse of AI technology has been a significant contributor to ethical breaches in the publishing world. Combination of computer-driven databases searches to harvest and manipulate existing data to repurpose or so-called create data out of thin air, as well as to steal published text and recombine them in ways that may seem original to the unsuspecting reader. And here are two very recent citations. This just came out in this past year. Research integrity in the era of artificial intelligence, challenges and responses, and also detecting research misconduct in the age of artificial intelligence. This is a very significant and ever-present problem in the publishing world. So you probably all are aware of ChatGPT. There is a concern about potential misuse of ChatGPT and like platforms, such as in creation of deepfake audio and text, and spreading false or misleading information. There's also concern about unintended bias in the training data, which could also lead to the model perpetuating harmful stereotypes or discrimination. So here's another article that came out fairly recently, Plagiarism and Cheating. Students already being caught using ChatGPT to plagiarize schoolwork at the collegiate level at Furman University. Its assistant philosophy professor, Darren Hick, recently spoke with the New York Post about catching a student who used the chatbot to formulate a 500-word essay he assigned as a take-home test. Hick detailed that not only was the submission flagged for AI usage, but that the text read like it was written by a very smart 12th grader or someone learning to write or who hadn't developed their own style. Here's another article that came out very recently. AI fabricated junk science floods Google Scholar. AI generated research is a threat both in terms of society's knowledge and public trust in science. This was the conclusion made by the researchers from the Swedish School of Library and Information Sciences, the University of Borås, Sweden, that recently identified over 100 suspected AI-generated articles in the Google Scholar search engine. There's all kinds of articles that are coming out very recently. These are just a few that I found just the other day in the last couple of years on ChatGPT and ethical issues. So now the publishing houses have caught up to this technology, and now they have had to institute formal policies about AI use. And by the way, these rules apply not only to authors, but to reviewers of manuscript and also the editors of journals. So here is, again, I'm using Elsevier because it's the largest biomedical publishing house in the world. So here is generative AI policies and declaration of generative AI in scientific writing. They declare authors must declare the use of generative AI in scientific writing upon submission of the paper. The following guidance refers only to the writing process, not to the use of AI tools to analyze and draw insights from data as part of the research process. And notably, this applies also to reviewers and editors, and their policies are published online. Fortunately, there are new tools that are evolving all the time for detecting the use of AI in manuscripts. Unfortunately, these tools can only analyze text, but there's several of these that are being made increasingly sophisticated to be able to detect images that have been generated by AI or taken from another source. So some closing thoughts for this particular lecture. The value of one's contribution to science is judged more on the impact than on the number of one's publications. And it's better to succeed because of one's reputation rather than in spite of it. And at this point, we're going to just take a brief break and ask if anybody has questions. Are there any in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat at this time, but now would be the time if you have a question, if you can go ahead and unmute and feel free to ask one. I think we don't have any at this time, so if you'd like to move on to the chat, please do so. And if
Very
you
good.
still have questions, could you please write them in the chat? And then I will address those questions to Dr. Fliesler at the end of the case studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just as for last time, I have cases that I came up with. Any resemblance to any persons living or dead is purely coincidental. So case one, Mary is a technician in the lab of Dr. Cool. She tends to work during a regular Monday through Friday work week, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. She assists graduate students and postdocs in Dr. Cool's lab with their projects, as well as doing experimental work specifically assigned to her by Dr. Cool. Mostly her work consists of running polyacrylamide gels, Western blots, and PCR. Over a conversation at lunch one day, Mary learned that the lab had recently published a blockbuster paper in Nature Genetics, which included work that she had done in the lab. However, her name was not included in the list as a co-author. Mary then confronted Dr. Cool about not being included as a co-author on the paper, saying that her work represented a significant contribution. Dr. Cool agreed that Mary had contributed substantively to the project and explained that he specifically gave her credit in the acknowledgement section of the paper for technical assistance. To do otherwise, he said, would violate ICMJE guidelines, which would be uncool. All right, so the questions that arise. Does Mary have a legitimate case? Should she have been included as a co-author on the paper? Why or why not? And this is audience participation time. So I'd like to hear from anybody.
No, she would not have been a co-author.
So that's Ariel. Ariel, why not?
Because she was just providing technical assistance, she wouldn't qualify as a co-author.
Okay. What are the other what would she have to have done to qualify? And you don't have to answer this, Ariel. Anybody? I went over this at least 3 times.
Maybe providing some significant ideas to that project, like while they were designing the project.
Okay, so intellectual contributions, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Also writing some of the manuscript or reviewing it.
Zachary, that is correct as well. Remember, writing being part and integrally involved in the writing of the manuscript, as well as maybe any revisions that might have been necessary. Okay, good. So you see, she was paid to do a job. That's all she did. All right. And she did her part. So her contributions were acknowledged, but didn't qualify um, for co-authorship. What if Mary had been a graduate student or a postdoc, so not a technician? Would that change your answer? Think about what she actually did. Would that change your answer?
No, not unless she helped with the manuscript.
Right. And also had substantive intellectual contribution, right? For design, analysis of data, etc. Okay, do you know of instances where technicians have been given co-author status on papers? And if you know of examples, what were the circumstances? Anybody?
I definitely did early on in my career, but I would say it wasn't given. Since I worked on executing and developing certain things, I would write components of the paper and the methods section. If I had helped with the methods of the actual study and then wrote up the methods for the manuscript. So I was involved in many stages.
Okay. I can tell you that before the ICMJ guidelines were generated, it was not uncommon in many laboratories for technicians, especially longtime technicians that had contributed, done basically all of the work in a laboratory for a particular PI. It was not uncommon for them to be included as co-authors, where they didn't actually write any of the manuscript or even do anything with reviewing the content. And because that was such a common practice, it was then evaluated, and therefore these guidelines that were formalized by the ICMJE came about. Okay, so if you look back in the historic literature in the 50s and 60s and 70s, even the 80s and 90s, you will see the names of people who were technicians, and that's all they did. But nowadays, those people are given due credit in the acknowledgement section, right? Okay, here we go. Case 2. Dr. Jung is a junior faculty member in the Department of Big Data Science, which is chaired by Dr. I.M.A. Slimebucket. She has just finished writing up a manuscript describing the work her lab has been doing for the last 3 years and is thinking of submitting it to Science. She sends a draft of her manuscript to her department chair for his comments and suggestions. A week later, Dr. Jung receives her manuscript back from Dr. Slimebucket with some minor edits and a few sidebar queries in the margins. She also notices that Dr. Slimebucket has inserted his name on the author line. Dr. Jung thanks Dr. Slimebucket for making suggested edits, but questions including him as a co-author. Dr. Slimebucket insists that his edits were substantive and that including him as a co-author would add, quote, gravitas to the paper, given his eminent standing in the field. He also reminds Dr. Jung that her promotion and tenure rely on his goodwill and endorsement of her. Questions. Should Dr. Slimebucket be included as a co-author on Dr. Jung's paper? Why or why not? Audience participation time.
No.
Karishma, okay. No, why not?
Because he just reviewed or checked the paper and how it is written and raised few comments about it. He did not contribute it significantly to any of the research work or design or actual writing part.
Okay. So what would this illustrate if his name was included as a co-author? Something that I talked about during my lecture.
Is it like that honorary authorship thing?
Yes, honorary authorship or gift authorship. Yes. Okay, so he did not qualify under earned authorship principles, right? If he is not included as a co-author, is there some other way that his so-called contributions might be more suitably acknowledged? How would that be done? Let's hear it from somebody else, like Shaman Luo, for instance. Shaman is unmuted. Shaman, can you tell us?
Yeah, I'm thinking about if the acknowledgement will be the way to.
Okay, so let's say if you were writing the acknowledgement, what would you say about Dr. Slimebucket?
The with the help of editing the manuscript.
Okay, you could say thank Dr. Slimebucket for making useful suggestions in the course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe also providing some kind of material support as the department chair.
Yes.
That would be certainly reasonable and appropriate, but not really anything more. Okay. Thank you. So
Thank you.
if Dr. Slimebucket insists on being included as a co-author, what recourse does Dr. Jung have? This should start making you feel uncomfortable. Put yourself in the place of Dr. Jung. Dr. Slimebucket is the department chair. Come on, people. You're all postgraduates.
Risk you losing your job by going above him.
Yeah. So you can challenge your department chair by going to your dean and explaining the situation. Now, this is not going to endear you to your department chair, okay? But this is this bleeds into the last part. Other than an issue of authorship ethics, are there any other aspects you find of concern with this scenario? And think about the very last paragraph of this case. What does Dr. Slimebucket tell Dr. Jung?
I think it's unethical for him to make mention of that her tenure relies on his goodwill. Like that is kind of like blackmailing.
Yeah, or the legal term is coercion.
Thank you.
Yes. So it creates a coercive, and you may have heard this recently in politics, quid pro quo. Yes. So yeah, so this is absolutely unethical. By the way, if any of you that are on this call ever encounter this situation, there is recourse and there is legal recourse through the university. So if you ever come into contact with this situation, you can seek remedy from your dean and also higher up in administration. And also, if you encounter this this situation personally and you don't feel comfortable about pursuing it, please feel free to reach out to me and I will help you. Okay.
They're also directed in the past to go into HR. Would you agree with that at some time as well?
That's correct. So HR has a formal process for dealing with these kinds of complaints, just as anything else like sexual harassments, for instance. Okay, so forming a coercive environment in the workplace is strictly not allowed. It's unethical and it's illegal. Okay, so we're into the last case. So here is Dr. Vishnu Verheer, is a member of an NIH study section panel and has been assigned several grant applications for review. One of the applications concerns studies that are directly relevant to the work Dr. Verheer is doing in his own lab, using a brand new and unpublished technique developed by the PI whose application Dr. Verheer is reviewing. Dr. Verheer recognizes the value of this new method and that it would greatly enhance and speed up the work in his own lab. So he provides the details of the new method to a technician in his lab and instructs her to carry out some new experiments using it. The experiments provide spectacular results. Dr. Verheer then writes up and submits a manuscript describing the results and submits it to Cell. He also writes and submits a new grant application based largely upon that work, specifically directing it to a different study section than the one on which he had recently served. So some of these elements should be reminiscent to you because we discussed the David Bridges case, which have elements that are common to this particular case. So the question, did Dr. Verheer commit scientific misconduct? Why or why not? If so, under what part of the ORI definition of scientific misconduct does this fall? So let's hear from somebody else on this call. So how many people do we have on here currently?
So minus us, we have about 32.
Okay, so we've heard from about 5 people. I'd like to hear from somebody new, please.
Yes, he did commit scientific misconduct because he used a technique that had been developed by someone else that he had gotten access to under a privileged position as a reviewer of the journal. Then used the technique, I'm presuming without permission from the PI whose study it was to begin with, and then prepared his own manuscript of that technique based directly on it, and which means that he took it directly from someone else without attributing them or getting permission from them before doing so.
Okay, so under the ORI definition of scientific misconduct, what one word would describe all of that?
Trying to remember which one, because
So,
plagiarism doesn't quite sound right. I mean, if it's in the written form, it would be plagiarism.
But it is plagiarism. So don't forget the fundamental elements of misconduct is falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with not only a writing of a manuscript, but also reviewing a privileged communication, such as a grant application, as is the case here, or a manuscript submitted for publication. So yeah, Dr. Verheer committed scientific misconduct because he plagiarized, he stole somebody else's intellectual property. Yeah.
Just wrote something interesting in the chat. It's a good analogy that it's similar to insider trading.
Yeah, exactly. I never thought about it that way, but yes, that is true. So if Dr. Verheer's submitted manuscript was rejected, so it was never published, or his grant application was unsuccessful, so it wasn't funded, would this change your answer? Was he still guilty of misconduct?
I would say yes. It has nothing to do with the ultimate outcome. Rather, it's the initial action that was taken by Dr. Verheer and his intention with that initial work.
And you would be absolutely correct. So it doesn't matter if it ever saw the light of day. Remember, I told you even an entry in your lab notebook that never made it out of your lab is still scientific misconduct if you took those ideas from somebody else or stole data from somebody else. This should make you a little bit edgy. Is Dr. Verheer's lab tech guilty of scientific misconduct? In other words, he directly gave the methodology from a privileged source to a technician and instructed her to carry out those experiments using that method. Is his lab tech guilty of scientific misconduct?
It depends on whether or not she was aware of the source of that. The source of that, whether it was plagiarized, and whether or not she was involved in the writing of the manuscript, I would say.
Yes. So if it was if the person was completely naive, had no idea, just thought, just like in the David Bridges case, where a technician was given a verbatim passage of a manuscript and told to perform experiments, the technicians were not held liable, were not guilty of scientific misconduct. But if the technician questioned where this method came from and was told, oh yeah, I got it from a grant application that I recently reviewed, what would you say would be the appropriate action on the part of the technician? If you were the technician, what would you do?
To start out, ask if they had gotten permission from the person whose grant application it was to use the information.
Good. Okay, so that's good. Let's say Dr. Verheer said, no, I didn't. I just thought it was such a cool method, I decided to use it. Anybody have thoughts on this? All right, so nobody is weighing in here. All right, so if it was me as the technician, I would say I am very uncomfortable of doing experiments utilizing information that came from a privileged source without attribution or permission. And this could then become a very uncomfortable situation with you and Dr. Verheer. And what is your recourse in that case? These are very practical things, folks. These kinds of situations happen more often than you might think.
This is another situation where you'd probably have to go above the PI, either to the chair or to HR or wherever.
Exactly right, Zachary. Thank you very much. Oh, there is always some recourse, okay? Always do the ethically correct thing, okay? You could be at risk, you could feel at risk, but if you are punished because you are acting ethically and the person who is your superior is unethical, that punishment cannot stand, okay? So hopefully you don't find yourself in these kinds of very difficult situations, but these kinds of things do happen in the workplace, unfortunately. So why do you think Dr. Verheer directed his grant application to an alternative study section?
He full well knew what he was doing was wrong.
Okay, and you know, the way study sections operate is that there is an open discussion of grant applications, and there's usually 2 or 3, sometimes 4 reviewers for any given application. So it's chances are one of the other reviewers that was well aware of this novel method, where it came from, and knew that Dr. Verheer was one of the other reviewers, would out him, okay? Would basically say, Dr. Verheer stole this from an application that we previously reviewed in this study section, okay? So he was hoping to dodge that bullet by sending it to an alternative study section so that they wouldn't have a prior knowledge of that privileged source.
Cindy did write into me that she's having audio malfunctions and that she stated that they should go to a different supervisor to seek help.
Okay, that is a possibility, and thank you for the explanation. So do you think that Dr. Verheer could plausibly invoke what I call the Costanza defense? Oh, I didn't know that that was wrong.
I think it'd be very difficult to believe that he didn't know, given that he is a member of the study section panel and he is also a doctor. So it's granted that he probably knows the guidelines for this kind of behavior.
Yeah, in this day and age, pleading ignorance on something like this would be not plausible at all, right? I think those are the only cases that I have. Do people have any other questions about this
Lucas has a
material?
question about this particular case study, and I
Okay.
think it has to do with him directing it to an alternative study section. And he asked, would that make the other reviewers equally responsible for his actions?
No, the other reviewers aren't responsible because they probably don't have any knowledge if it's directed to another study session. So think about this. He's done his review. That panel is now over. And now after the fact, he now not only has his technician utilize this privileged information, but also writes his own grant application up and submits it to another study session. The other reviewers had no part in this at all. None.
And Ariel at one time was talking about acknowledgments. Ariel, do you have a question about acknowledgments?
No, it was just that I understood authorship, but then I was just wondering if there was like more detailed guidelines for acknowledgement versus authorship.
Just as the ones that you can find in the ICMJE guidelines, the recommendations.
Okay, all right, thank you.
There's a whole section on contributorship.
Okay, great.
Okay, but good question. Yes.
Oh,
I
go
have
ahead,
one
Zachary,
more.
go ahead.
Sorry, I have one question. If he's not publishing on the technique itself, but applying it to a different problem, and he was on this review panel, would it be unethical to reach out to the PI that wrote the original grant after the application had been reviewed and everything in the study section to discuss potentially working as a collaborator and proceeding with the work that way?
Zachary, great question. Very practical. Happens not infrequently. So no, it is not unethical at all. What Dr. Verheer should do is protect his anonymity by not saying he was a reviewer, but could say your grant was discussed at a study section. And by the way, the members of the study sections are published.
That's
So
what I was just thinking. Yep. Okay.
yeah, so they can look and see, oh yeah, he was a member of the study section, but it doesn't say which applications were assigned to you. Okay.
Absolutely.
So he could simply say, very plausibly, I recall hearing your grant application discussed. It seemed to be very well received. I thought it was a very clever idea. I would love to use this method in my own laboratory. Would you be amenable to collaborating with my laboratory or allowing me to utilize this method? Certainly allowing the PI to publish, have first rights for publication of the method. Okay, but yeah, you can do this. I actually did this several years ago, not from a study section, but I was sent a manuscript to review from a journal, and all of a sudden these lights went off in my head saying, these guys just discovered the reason behind a particular disease that I'm interested in. I thought, and I said, I think they've come up with something very seminal here. And after the manuscript was, accepted for publication, I was very favorable as a reviewer. I reached out to them and said, I'm aware of this method that you came up with, and these results that you published or submitted for publication, and I would like to collaborate with you. And in fact, we published 3 papers together. There's a correct way to do this, and it's totally allowable.
That's great. That was perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So anything else in the chat?
Nothing else in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to unmute or write it in the chat if you have it.
Again, this is the last lecture in these workshop series that I'm going to be directly participating in. But if any questions come up at any of the time that you're here or any time during your professional career, and you have questions about this material, please drop me an email and I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Okay. So thank you very much,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
participation.